Hi guys, welcome back to Pro Studio Live and welcome to the Pro Tools Authority class. Last week we had our first episode which covered some digital audio basics, including an explanation of bit depth, sampling rate, amplitude, frequency and pitch, waveforms, the Nyquist theorem. We also covered analog and digital basics and analog to digital conversion. We also talked about different types of configurations for Pro Tools rigs, including the differences between HD native hardware and HDX hardware, and how to optimize your session for a host-based system. We covered that and a lot more in our last episode, so I really recommend you check it out if you haven't already. We laid some great groundwork with important information that any audio engineer should understand completely. Okay, so today in episode 2, we're going to cover the different menus in Pro Tools and details on Pro Tools windows and their layouts. We'll also cover some basics on Pro Tools controls and modes, and I'll show you some customization options to improve your workflow along the way. Before we begin, though, I want to recommend that you make sure that tooltips is turned on in your system. This is good, especially if you're first learning, because the tooltips are the small pop-up bits of text that appear if you hover your mouse over a tool or a button. So you simply hover, and then Pro Tools will display the more complete name or for whatever you're hovering over. So to turn on tooltips, just go to Setup and then Preferences, and then you'll just want to make sure that you're in the Display tab. So I'm going to just show you that really quickly. So we're going up to the Setup menu right here at the top, and we're going down to the bottom of the menu. We're going to go to find Preferences. We're going to click on that and see we're in the Display tab already. There's a bunch of other tabs here. It's good to know they exist. And here's tooltips, which is what we're looking for. You have function or details are the options, right? So if you check details, it will show you the complete name for the thing that you're hovering over. And function will tell you the function of whatever you're hovering over. So you can pick and choose which, if any, of those two options that you want. So I'm going to just leave them enabled for now. So I'm just going to hit OK. And so anyway, you can see if I hover over something, like right now I'm hovering over the zoomer tool, it will display a description and possibly a function for that thing. So anyway, this is a good feature to know about and to enable if you're learning Pro Tools. So I highly recommend it. Okay, so first let's cover the menus in Pro Tools. So in our last episode, we discussed opening up a session and creating a new session, including some customization options to improve your performance on a host-based system. So check that out if you haven't already. But that brings us to here. We have Pro Tools open already, and you can see the top menu. So this is what we're going to discuss. So we're going to discuss this top menu here, where it says File, Edit, View, Track, Clip, etc. That's what we're going to start with. Okay, so the file menu, it has stuff in it that pertains to opening, making, and maintaining Pro Tools sessions. So it has things like your save options, your opening options, import and export options, and even bouncing options. So next is going to be the edit menu, which I'm just going to open up for you guys to see. Which has options that let you edit and manipulate whatever section of media you have selected. So you can edit things that are in your timeline here. So your timeline is seen in the edit window, right? It's where we see the waveforms right here. And when I highlight a chunk of audio, you can see that edit selection on the actual clips. So I'm just going to highlight the chunk of audio. The edit selection is this part right here that's highlighted, right? And then you can also see the timeline selection, which is the highlighted section surrounded by those little blue flags that's above the tracks. So this is actually the timeline selection. So it's important to know that those are different. I think the default in Pro Tools is for them to be linked, but it is possible to unlink them. So you have your timeline selection and your edit selection. Okay, so the timeline is this whole horizontal area here with the time code and minutes and seconds labeled. So that's this whole chunk right here. So from here, from this top section down and then across over. So all these different time values. You can see if I zoom out, you can see further in time, right? So that's that section. Okay, so you can also add or remove units of measurement to the timeline, but we'll go into details on that later on. Anyway, so let's go back to the edit menu. So the edit menu, it lets you edit selections of media. So you can find options like cut, copy, paste, and clear. You can add fades, duplicate, you can separate and heal clips, you can repeat or shift selections, and a lot more using the edit menu. So let's move on to the view menu. So here's the view menu. It has to do with display options and how the tracks and audio and data and windows are displayed. So a lot of the view menu options are binary in the sense that they're a toggle or a checkmark option that's only on or off. So to select an option to display it, just click on it so that checkmark is displayed, and then you should see that option appear in its proper Pro Tools window. So let's see, I could do that really quick. Let's see what I want to add here. So I want to view, let's try view other displays, the MIDI editor, because this one will be very clear for you guys to see. So if you look towards the bottom of my window, when I click on this, the MIDI editor pops up. So that's basically what view does. And then again, since it's a binary thing, it's on or off, I can uncheck it and it just goes away. Okay. So next is going to be the track menu. So the track menu helps you make and maintain tracks in your session. So these track commands include creating a new track, grouping tracks, duplicating tracks, deleting tracks, and altering track settings. So next we're going to go on to the clip menu. So here's the clip menu. And the clip menu affects clips in Pro Tools. So clips are things that point to audio or MIDI, either the whole file or a section of the file that exists somewhere on the hard drive. So for example, in the audio files folder, you'll have those files. Back when I was first learning Pro Tools, they were called regions instead of clips. So you might run into people that call them that. But anyway, I'll show you an example of a clip with the waveform depicted inside. So for example, right here, if I click on that, we have a clip. And I can move this clip around, and the clip can be any size. So I can cut the clip and then just move it around, and now I have two clips out of one clip, right? So examples of things you can do with the clip menu will include grouping, looping, warping, and quantizing, arranging and modifying clip options, right? So now if you're not running an HD rig, then you can't edit video, but if you are, then you can use some of the functions in the clip menu on video clips too now. Okay, so next is going to be the event menu. So we're going to just open that up so you guys can see it. And the event menu has to do with tempo and timing settings. So it has commands that have to do with audio events and MIDI operations and properties. So this includes things like cut time, insert time, identifying beats, and key change operations. Okay, so next is going to be the audio suite menu, which you can see right here. And there are these things called Audio Suite plugins in Pro Tools. And this menu is where you're going to find them. So Audio Suite plugins don't process in real time, and they process to a selection of audio. So they're instead a form of file-based processing, right? So they process your selection, and then what they do is they actually replace that selection of audio with a newly processed version of the audio. So it's important to know that with Audio Suite plugins, you can undo them by holding Command and pressing Z, or by going to Edit and then selecting Undo, right? Which I can show you really quick. Edit, undo. So the last thing I did was was a clip slide, right? So I'd undo the clip slide. But if I had just done an Audio Suite plugin, that would be the undo option. But unlike plugin inserts, you can't place them on a track and then later make them inactive or bypass them to take away the effect. So once it's on your audio, it's on the audio. The nice thing about Audio Suite plugins, however, is that you can only process a small section of a track. So you can select just a small section of the track and process that. You don't have to put it over the entire track. Because they process your selection, right? So they aren't placed on the whole track. But we'll go more into Audio Suite plugins in more detail later. Okay, so the next menu is going to be the options menu. So I'm just going to open that up for you. And the options menu is for exactly what it sounds like it's for. It's for options, right? So it's kind of similar to the view menu in that the options menu has mostly options that are simply a toggle or checkmark options. So they're only on or off. So if you click on the option to toggle it on or off, that'll do it. So for example, these things are all toggles, right? You can see the check marks. If the check mark is present, then the option is on or enabled. And if there's no check mark, then the option is disabled or it's off. So the options menu has options for things like recording, editing, playback, and monitoring, and even displaying. So as you can see, if we check it out, you can find options like pre and post roll, looping playback, and so on. So you can see all the options down here, but we'll go into more details on each of those later. Okay, so next is going to be the setup menu. So this is for software and hardware configuration options. So in the setup menu, you can control things that pertain to your host-based processing or your external hardware, like your interface. So you can also set disk allocations here. You can change the session and MIDI settings. You can map your input and output settings, and you can change settings for your click and count off options, which we'll explain later. You can also access your preferences dialog box here, which we will go over in great detail later since there's so much that you can actually change with it. And actually, if you were here for our first episode, you'll remember our discussion of improving your host-based processing, which involved the dynamic plugin processing and the hardware buffer size options. And both of those are within the Playback Engine window, which is accessed through that setup menu. And actually, just like the Playback Engine option, all of the options that you select within the setup menu will display a dialog box. So because each of these options involve multiple parameters to configure, that's why they open up the box, right? So anyway, there aren't any toggle options here. So next we have the window menu, which I'll just open up for you guys to see. And it has options for controlling various Pro Tools windows. So, for example, you can toggle the mix and edit window here, which I can just kind of show you really quickly. You see the mix and edit. So right now it's checked because we're in the edit window, but I can just click and it goes to the mix window, right? And then if you notice now mix is checked, so I can just toggle back. So you can see, let's see, you can see that happen, but as we went over in the last episode, holding the command button and hitting the enter key is a faster way to toggle between those two windows. So I'll just kind of show you that again. It's a lot faster, see? Okay, so like all the keys being displayed on my screen. Okay, so you can also toggle the transport window on and off through the window menu. And we'll go more into what the transport window is here in this episode, but it mostly has to do with moving about within the session in terms of timing. So anyway, again, like the mix and edit windows, it's faster to use the short keys to toggle this window on and off. So I would try to get in the habit of holding command and hitting the one key on your numeric keypad to get to the transport window. So if you see window and transport, you can see it actually tells you how to open that up. I would recommend getting in the habit of doing that instead. You might notice that the normal one key won't work to do this, and that's because it has to be on the numeric keypad. So it can be a real pain to try to work in Pro Tools without that numeric keypad, especially if you're trying to work in a professional environment where speed and efficiency are really important. So that's why most studios will have a computer keyboard that has the numeric keypad. If you're using a computer with a shorter keyboard, for example, if you're using a laptop without the numeric keypad, like I am actually right now, you can either get a separate USB numeric keypad to make things easier, or you can get a USB keyboard that includes that numeric keypad. So, for example, at home, I have a separate visual monitor and a keyboard with the numeric keypad included, and I have a separate mouse. So I just plug my laptop into those, and then I actually shut the laptop to work. So I've also heard about various programs that you can get that will remap the keyboard shortcuts on your laptop to get around that issue. I haven't done that, though, because if you do that, then you run the risk of learning a system that's actually unique to you, right? So it might therefore slow you down when you're back on a standard studio computer that uses the numeric keypad, or you're in a studio that uses that standard system, right? So there are also some built-in key combos that you can use when you would otherwise need to use the numeric keypad. If you're stuck on a shorter keyboard, right? So, for example, to create a marker in Pro Tools, you would normally hit the Enter button on the numeric keypad. And I place markers a lot. So this is one of the things that drives me crazy when I'm trying to do some work on my laptop without that extended keyboard. But without that numeric keypad, you can just actually hold the function button and hit the Enter key on your laptop. And that should bring up a new memory location window, right? So I can try that out right now. So I'm just going to drop my cursor here and hold function and then hit the Enter. And there you go. You get the new memory location window. It's the same as if you had a keypad, kind of. Okay, so let's get back to these menus. So in the window menu, you can also access things like window configurations and arrangement, which is great for quickly rearranging your windows. And I recommend checking out those arrangement options sometime in the future. So here are the arrangement options. There's also MIDI and score editors that you can access here, and the task manager. There's also the workspace browser, automation window, and the memory locations window, which is actually different from that new memory location dialog window that we just showed. So you can also get to the video universe and video windows, the color palette and undo history windows, the disk and system usage windows here. So something to keep in mind is that this window menu and the view menu are often confused. So the way to keep it straight in your head as far as which menu does what is that the view menu controls specific parts of a window, or the view menu options alter how the components of a window are displayed. So the window menu, however, allows you to hide or display whole entire windows, or the window menu options allow you to arrange the windows on the screen. Okay, so that'll just kind of help you keep it straight. So next we have the Marketplace menu, which is simply where you can access Avid's online store. So since it's an online store, your computer has to be connected to the internet to access the store from this menu. In Avid's store, you can log in to your Avid profile account and you can purchase things like plugins. But anyway, the Marketplace menu has only been around since Pro Tools version 10. And that's pretty much all you need to know about that one for now. So let's move on to the Help menu. So the Help menu, it's similar to the Marketplace menu in that it links to things online. So the Help menu links to documentation and online resources that can really help you out. So this includes things like the Pro Tools knowledge base, the Pro Tools reference guide, the Avid audio forums, Avid's online help system, and a lot more. So one thing that I find particularly useful within this menu is the Pro Tools Shortcuts guide. So if I go down here to Pro Tools Shortcuts and I click on it, it will actually open up the Pro Tools Shortcuts guide, which you can see right here. So I take a look at this every once in a while. And what you can do here is if you're looking for something specific, you can actually click on the Open PDF and Preview button or the Save PDF to Downloads folder button, which pops up when you hover towards the bottom of the document here. So I'm just going to open one up right now for you. So I'm just going to do the Open PDF. So the reason why I do this is this way you can run a search on the whole document to find what you're looking for. So otherwise, if you're just in the window that pops up when you go to Help and then Pro Tools Shortcuts, you can't run a search by holding Command and hitting F like you usually can on so many different programs on a Mac. So that's a really good thing to know. I'll do that every once in a while to see if there's a shortcut for what I want to do, or just to try to increase my my speed and efficiency. So anyway. Through the help menu, you can also do stuff like check for updates. Although by default, Pro Tools will usually check for updates on startup and it will notify you. But some people turn that off. So that's another way to access the updater. I'm just going to close this window that I have over here. Okay. So those are all the different menus at the top of your session. And let's move on to looking at the two main Pro Tools windows that we see upon startup. So the two main windows, which we already mentioned and showed briefly, are the mix and edit windows, in my opinion. So we already discussed how you can toggle between those two by holding Command and hitting Enter. And again, that's a really useful short key to learn. But anyway, we'll discuss these two windows, and later we'll get into other windows in Pro Tools, which include things like the transport window and the score editor window and the MIDI editor window. So we'll go into a little more detail on those. Okay, so let's start with the mix window, actually. So here's the mix window. The mix window was designed to mimic a traditional mixer. So it's useful for recording and for mixing your audio. So when you have tracks in this window, Pro Tools will create one channel strip for each track. And that's no matter what type of track, whether it's an audio track, an instrument track, a MIDI track, a master track, an aux track, whatever, right? So this is what a channel strip looks like. It's this vertical section here with the fader. That's repeated a bunch of times because I have a bunch of tracks, right? So each track's channel strip will have a fader for volume and controls for things like sends, inserts, input and output assignments, automation mode selection, panning, record enabling, soloing and muting, and mix group selection too, and also voice assignment selection. So we'll go into that a little bit more in a minute, but the mix window also has a side column, which you can see right here. So I want to go into that first. So the side column, it's located on the left-hand side of the mix window, and basically it gives you more display and view options. So within the side column is the track list and the mix group list, right? So the track list is this top part right here where it says tracks. It's that square right there, or rectangle really, right? But the track list is used for organizing and displaying your tracks. And it's similar to the track list in the edit window, which we'll cover in a bit. So below that is the mix group list, which is right here. And the mix group list is for displaying track grouping, right? So on the top right-hand corner of each of these lists, you'll see an arrow that's a drop-down menu. So here's one of them for the group one. You can just click on it to open up that drop-down menu. And these drop-down menus have options that help you configure these displays. So you can adjust various details about it. But let's see. So you can also adjust this side section's width and height by hovering at the edge of the list with your mouse and clicking and dragging, which I'll show you. So I'm clicking right now, I'm holding my click and I'm dragging and it changes the width. I can also change the height here the same way. Or you can hide or show the side column by clicking on the little arrow that appears at the bottom left of the area that displays the channel strips, right? So here's that little arrow on the bottom left, and I'm just going to click it, and it's going to disappear. And then if you notice, oh, my doc's showing. If you notice, this little arrow switches direction, and it instead points to the right. So if I click on it again, it'll open it back up. Okay, so let's move back to the section with the channel strips. At the top of each of these channel strips, I need to scroll up so you can see it. Within the mix window, we'll see controls that involve signal routing. So these signal routing controls, they affect the flow of audio into and out of the track. And so they include things like inserts and sends, and input and output selectors. So these are actually the input and output selectors. So this is the output, the bottom one's the output, the top one's the input. And then up here you see inserts and sends, and you just click on them to select whatever you want to send or whatever you want to insert. And we'll go over that in a little more detail. But the insert selectors are where you can click to add plugins, which do real-time processing to the track. So sends are used for sending the audio from the track out to an additional bus or an output path. So the actual input and output selectors, which again are these two right here on each of the channel strips, are used for controlling the input of audio to the track and the output of audio from the track. Often it's from or to your audio interface. So for example, if you're tracking, you will select the input of the track here, and that will be according to which input on your interface is connected to your microphone or your preamp, right? So you'll also often set the output of tracks to your main output, which is usually routed to your studio monitors for playback. So below these signal routing controls, we'll find the record and playback controls, which includes, as you go down, the automation mode selector, which gives you different options that control how your automation behaves, the pan controls, the track record enable button, which is this little, it's a red button. I don't have an input. Oh, I have the microphone, so it's going to feed back if I do it right now. But that's the record enable button, the solo button, and the mute button. And then the volume control fader below that, right? So here's the fader. You can click and drag it. So just keep in mind that the volume fader doesn't affect or change the input level that's going to your track. So if you have audio that's going into your track so hot that it's distorting, you have to reduce that level at the source that leads to your track, not using the fader knob that's on the track that's receiving the hot audio. So that's really important to know. Okay, so let's move on to the edit window. So I'm just going to do Command equals, right, to shift over to the edit window. And in the edit window, you get a timeline view of your audio. So you can also get that timeline view for video that you have, for MIDI data, and for mixing or recording automation. So this is also where you'll see those waveforms that of your audio that we briefly discussed before. And it's aptly named the edit window since most of your editing will happen in this window, right? So when you make a new track, if it's an audio or MIDI track, then it will not only appear in this window, but it will also have controls for record enabling, muting, soloing, and shifting the automation modes. Just, very similar to what we had in the mix window here. So let's cover some basic anatomy terms for the edit window. So the top section is called the toolbar. So that's this top section here, all the way over to the right. It encompasses basically from where it says like shuffle, slip, spot, and grid all the way to the right horizontally. And it goes down to the section where it has the drop down. It goes all the way to the side, to the side where it has the drop down menu arrow on the top right. So this arrow. So it's the entire width of that window, right? And that drop down menu arrow allows you to control what options are actually displayed in the toolbar. So right below the toolbar is the timeline display, which shows timing rulers and markings, and it helps you understand time-based concepts. So I'm just going to show you I already showed you the timeline display, but we'll reiterate it here. So it's this section here where it says minutes per second, time code, tempo, markers, and then you have the time parameters. Okay. So in the timeline display, you can show various rulers, such as the time code ruler, which is used in video and film. And there are actually two types of time code that you can choose from. The minutes and seconds ruler, which is useful for anyone that needs to measure an absolute time, such as radio people. The bars and beats ruler, and I'm just going to kind of open up so you can see some of these options that I don't have right now. So the bars and beats ruler, which is useful for composers and musicians. The samples ruler, and we went over samples in episode 1, but the samples ruler is useful because it's the smallest editing resolution in the Pro Tools system. And you could also open up the feet and frames ruler, which is another unit of measurement that's used in video and film. So you can also display the tempo ruler, which marks or rather labels the tempo and any tempo changes in your session. You can open up the markers ruler, which displays user-created markers, like I did when I hit function enter earlier, right? And so you can use those to label important spots in your session, such as like the chorus or a verse or a spot that needs to be retracked. And, you know, the possibilities are endless with the markers. It's whatever you want to mark. You can also open up the meter ruler, which lets you change and also displays meter changes in your session. The key ruler view, which lets you denote key changes in your session. And the chords ruler view, which lets you add chord symbols to your session. So you can control what is displayed in the section just by using this drop-down menu that I have open right now. So it's this box that you click, right? So it's on that like top left-ish section of the timeline display. It's also good to know that the rulers that display in the dark gray color are called time-based rulers. And the ones that display in various other colors are called conductor rulers because of their various functions. Okay, so you can also rearrange the order of the rulers that you have displayed by clicking and dragging on them. So I'm going to try that right now. So I'm just going to click and hold and drag, and I can just move it up because I want markers higher up or maybe lower. Usually I want markers lower. But anyway, you can click and drag and rearrange them. So in the top right corner of the timeline display, there's also an arrow that allows you to toggle universe view on and off. So I will show you that. So it's this little arrow right here. And it's just kind of like the sidebar in the mix window, in that it's a little arrow, and when you click it, it disappears. And when you click it again, it opens back up. And the universe view, it's the section that's appearing and disappearing, right? Basically, the universe view allows you to see a tiny view of your entire session. And it also displays with where you are within the session. So you can click and drag to easily move around within the session in terms of time within the universe view, which I can show you. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see where I am. So see this highlighted square here? That's where I am. So if I click and hold it, I can drag around anywhere within the session. So for example, if I know that this is an important spot right here, I can easily, if I'm over here, I can just click and drag and bring myself there very quickly. So the universe view is pretty useful, but we'll go more into using that and these timeline views and what they are in more depth later. Okay, so right below the timeline display is the tracks display, which is logically where the tracks are displayed, right? So this is where you do a lot of your actual audio editing, since it's where the waveforms are displayed. And here you can make selections in order to copy, paste, duplicate, or do whatever to your audio, right? So it's also where a lot of your automation will display. It's where those controls that we mentioned earlier live as well, being record enabling, the muting, the soloing, and the shifting the automation modes, right? So I'm just going to kind of show you with my mouse where that section is. So it's like from up here on the top left of it, all the way down, and then over, and that's what it is. So to either side of the timeline display and the tracks display are side columns, and that's similar to the mix window, right? So actually I have to open up my side columns. Okay, so I have side columns on both sides in this window, right? So we can toggle those on and off by clicking on the tiny little arrow, which I just showed you, right? But it's very similar to the one in the mix window. They live at the bottom of the edit window, or you can make them disappear by double clicking on the border between the side columns and the tracks display as well. So I can just kind of show you that really quick. So I hover until I get that double arrow, and then I double click and it disappears, and it's very similar to pressing that little arrow at the bottom. But I'm going to open them back up. Okay. So you can also click and drag along the edges of the side columns to adjust their height and width, which makes it easy to customize your edit window. So for example, you could widen or reduce your tracks display to your liking this way. So it's very similar to the side column again in the mix window. So I'm just going to kind of show you that really quick. So I can make that really skinny. I can drag up. If I'm like, oh, well, now I want to see the whole text here, I can drag it out and see the whole text. Okay. So that's the basic anatomy of the edit window. So some detail about the side columns. The side columns simply give you extra view and display options for various session data, right? So the left-hand side column has the track list, which is labeled tracks on the top here, and the edit group list, which is labeled groups down here. So they both have arrows on the top right corner that open drop-down menus where you can configure their functions a bit. We'll go into more detail on that later, but it's good to know that it's there if you're experimenting, figuring out the program. Again, these are these little arrows right here and there. So the track list, it's used to display and sort tracks. It can be very useful for staying organized within your session. So for example, the dot to the left of each track tells you a bit about the track status in the tracks display section of the edit window. So if I click on a dot, I can actually toggle the track between being hidden or being displayed within my tracks display. So I'll just kind of show you that really quickly. So I'm going to pick this track right here, and you see the little dot that I'm talking about. I'm going to click on that dot, and if you look over here, you'll see it disappear. Actually, I'm going to do the MIDI so you guys can see it easier. So I'm going to make the MIDI disappear. So that's this dot right here. And there, now it's hidden. So inversely, if you're like, where's my MIDI track? I want to work on it. You can look over here on the tracks list and you can be like, oh, well, it's hidden. I'm just going to click here and it's going to come right back on. Okay, so there are more functions and things to know about in the track list, but we'll go into more explanation of how the track list works later. So the edit group list, it displays the group status for tracks. So we'll get more into that later when we get into making the groups, but it's good to know that you can group tracks, and it's also good to know that this section is where information about those groupings are displayed. So again, that's this section down here. You can also control things like which groups are active and which are inactive in a session here. But anyway, okay, so the right-hand side column, which is over here, it holds the clip list. So the clip list shows information on the source audio files, the MIDI files, and any file segments in your session. So Pro Tools HD systems will also have video clips and files here. Just like the track and the edit group lists, the clip list has a pop-up menu that helps you perform various actions and configure this section. So you should be pretty familiar with these drop-down arrows by now, but it's right there. Okay, so let's go back to the toolbar, which you'll remember is this top section right here. It's good to start by learning about the edit modes and the edit tools. So on the top left of the toolbar, you can find the edit modes section options. So there are 4 main edit modes, right? Shuffle, spot, slip, and grid. And these modes affect how things like audio clips, MIDI clips, and MIDI notes move and are placed when you choose to move them. I'm sorry. So that's right here, right? This includes when you do things like copy or cut and paste to move a clip. And it also affects how the different edit tools function. But we'll go into more detail on each of these edit modes and edit tools later on in this course. So also within the toolbar, you can find the edit tools. So that's this section right here. You can select what tools you use to edit your audio and MIDI using this section. And they're just buttons that you press, right? So some ways you can modify your clips with these tools include selecting, trimming, and moving. And the main tools here are the trimmer, the selector, the grabber, and the pencil tools. There's also a multi-tool options where you can select multiple tools at once, which I have highlighted right now. So I'm going to go zoomer, right? And then I'm going to go multi-tool, or I can select just the grabber, that sort of thing. But we'll go more into those details later about what each thing does. Also within the edit window is the edit window toolbar menu. So it's the small drop-down menu arrow at the far top right of the edit window. We already mentioned it. So you can customize the edit window by showing and hiding different elements of the edit window through this drop-down menu, right? So some of the sections you can display or hide. I'm just going to kind of open it up so you can see the options here. So some of the sections you can display or hide in this menu include the zoom controls section, this transport controls section, the MIDI controls section, and just to familiarize you with those sections, because like a lot of things, we're going to go into more detail on those later. So you can see if I do it, just to show you as a demonstration, if I click on zoom controls here, I should probably point out where those are for you first. Okay, so I'm going to bring them back in. So here are my zoom controls, right? So if you watch those, when I click on zoom controls, it'll disappear and then it'll reappear. So you can configure things very easily. So my transport section is a section in the toolbar towards the right. So it's right here. And it has the play and stop buttons. And it's just good to know that that's the transport section, and we'll go into more detail on it in this class today. My MIDI controls are immediately to the right of the transport controls section. So that's this section here. And again, just to familiarize yourself with what those look like, and we'll explore those more later. So yeah, actually the MIDI editor and the score editor windows also have drop-down menus that are similar to the edit windows toolbar menu in that they let you control what elements are being displayed. You can also see a similar drop-down menu that only has those toolbar elements if you right-click on the background of the toolbar section. So I could click here and see a bunch of stuff, or I can right-click on the background. Let's get in the middle of the toolbar. I'm just going to right-click and see I can still select the different things that are in the toolbar, like the zoom controls, etc. Another fun thing that you can do actually is hold Command and then click, or Control and click in Windows on any of the elements in the toolbar section up top to move them around and change their order. So I'm going to just do that really quick for you. So I'm going to hold Command and see how my little hand cursor appears when I hold Command. I'm going to click and I can just drag it and rearrange it. I can rearrange anything in here. Okay. So not many engineers seem to know about this or do this, though. So most studios and engineers will have, and they'll want the default order for the toolbar elements to remain just the way they are. So I wouldn't mess around with that too much. Okay, so that's the basics on what I personally consider to be the two main windows in Pro Tools, the mix and the edit window. But there are also other windows, so let's cover some of those. So the transport window, it has options and buttons that help you do what's called transport functions. And I'll just open it up really quick for you. So we're going to go to Window, because I don't have a numeric keypad, right? I'm going to select Transport. And that opens up the transport window right here. And I can move it around and it'll kind of hang out wherever I put it. So these buttons, and options in the transport window are all about moving around within your session in terms of time. So I think I already mentioned this, but to reiterate, you can open the transport window by holding Command and pressing 1. It's good to kind of get that internalized in your head, 1 on the numeric keypad, or by going to Window and then selecting Transport. So you'll see familiar buttons on this window, such as the play, stop, fast forward, and rewind buttons. It's very much modeled after old media players like CD players. And some of these buttons you'll remember seeing at the top of the edit window too, right? So they're up here now because I moved them. Whether you press the buttons in that toolbar section of the edit window or on the actual transport window makes no difference. They're the same buttons. So anyway, the transport window has various options that you can display or hide. Like most of our windows in Pro Tools, right? So the transport controls section is always displayed to some extent, and it's the section with those play, pause, fast forward, and rewind buttons, right? So it's like this section. I have the extended version of it out right now, but sometimes it'll just be these buttons without this part below it. But you can toggle on and off things like the MIDI controls section, the synchronization section, the output meters section, and the counters section. And so if you click on this drop down, you can see all those options. And you just click them to toggle them on and off. You can also select an extended view option called the expanded transport, which you can see I have selected. Yeah, I have selected. So the expanded transport view, it's good to know that it's there, right? To pick and choose which of these options you want to see in the transport window, you just click on the drop-down menu, like I showed you, right? And you can also go, another way to do it is you can go to the view menu at the top of your session and then go to transport. I'm going to go to view and transport, and you can see the same options, right? Or similar options. The MIDI controls in the transport window have options that affect how MIDI is triggered, recorded, and played. So here's the MIDI section, right? It can affect things like your tempo and meter, how your MIDI is overdubbed, metronome settings, and so on. But we'll go more into that section later. So in the counters section of the transport window, you have location indicators that mirror your main and sub counters in the middle of your edit window in the toolbar section. So looks like I have that open. So right here, you'll see 6.06 and then another one, right? So let's see. This one's time code. This one's minutes and seconds. I'm just clicking on these arrows like normal left clicking to see. And you can see here's your main and your sub counter in that toolbar. So that's the same as this. So it'll mirror that. So the main counter can actually be set to a different unit of measurement than the sub counter. So for example, you could set one to minutes and seconds and set another to time code for a film project. It's whatever you find the most convenient. So if you want to go to a specific time, you can also click on the counter and enter the location value and then hit enter, and your cursor will then travel to that point. So I'll kind of show you that really quickly. Let's see where I'm going to place my cursor somewhere where we can see it. Sorry. All right, so I'm going to place my cursor. So I'm at 259. I'm going to go to, let's see, actually I'm going to go past 3, so it's a little easier. So I'm going to go to 330. So I'm just going to type in 330, and then I'm going to hit enter, and you see my cursor moved. So now it's over here instead of over here. So that's good if you want to travel to a specific point, if you're taking mixed notes or, working with someone and you need to be very specific about where something needs to happen. It's a really good way to do it. And again, to shift whatever unit of measurement we have, you just click on these little arrows and then you change it. So now it's on samples, which I don't really want it on samples. I'm going to move it back. Okay. So another window to know about is the MIDI editor window. So if you remember, we opened that by going to the window menu and selecting the MIDI editor window. So I'm just going to do that really quickly. So I'm going to close that one out. And I'm just going to go to MIDI editor. Okay. You might have noticed when I just selected that there are symbols to the right of the text that says MIDI editor window. Actually, I'm going to open that up again so you can see. So MIDI editor, there are these symbols, right? And those symbols represent the short keys that you should be able to take to get to the MIDI editor window. So depending on your settings and the keyboard, these won't always work, but it's a good place to start while learning those quick keys to become more efficient. So here it says that the control and the equals button will open this window. So we could also open and close it that way. So I'm just going to kind of open and close it really quickly. So it's control and equals. So I'm holding control. I'm going to hit equals and it disappeared. And now I'm going to reopen it. So that's working. Anyway, so the MIDI editor window is great for composing and editing MIDI, and it will display data for MIDI tracks, instrument tracks, and auxiliary input tracks. So you can edit this data here, and you can even open a bunch of different MIDI editor windows at once within your session, and you can use each to view something different within your session. So that's pretty useful. The MIDI editor window shows the basic MIDI data here. So as you can see, like the notes next to the piano scroll, but it also displays automation data below that piano scroll section. So some of the stuff you can edit here with the automation data is volume automation, velocity stocks, which I think is, that's what I have open here. So you see it says velocity. So these are velocity stocks. So if I take this and drag it down, I'm lowering the velocity with which that note is being hit. So see how it highlights the note that I'm working on the stock for? So you can very finely tune the performance. And you can also, in these automation lanes, you can adjust things like controller and automation data. So the section with the piano scroll is actually called the MIDI notes pane. And the part below that holds the automation data, it's called the automation and controller lanes. It holds the automation and controller lanes. It's also good to know that the MIDI notes pane will display multiple tracks of MIDI on there if you're displaying multiple tracks. So you'll see the MIDI of those multiple tracks actually superimposed over each other. So that's just good to be aware of if you're opening up this window. So if you're back in your edit window and then you go to view and then other displays and then select MIDI editor, you can also pop up the MIDI editor view. So I showed you that earlier for another purpose, but I'm just going to do it again. So I'm going to go view and then other displays and then MIDI editor, and it pops up at the bottom here if you watch. So this is just kind of a smaller version of the MIDI editor window that's merged and then placed into the edit window. So it's not its own separate window. So it's kind of whatever works best for you with your workflow. So that's that. Let's see. So the score editor window is probably what we should talk about next. So I'm just going to get rid of this really quickly. MIDI editor. Okay. So the score editor window is another window that we briefly mentioned last class. The window is like the MIDI Windows notation view in a lot of ways, but it's more focused on converting your MIDI data into formal written music notation than the MIDI editor window is. So again, you can open it by going to the window menu and selecting the score editor, or by holding Control and Option and then hitting the Enter key. So I'll kind of show you score editor. Okay. So this window has tools for editing and moving it about, including display settings that help you identify how different MIDI tracks appear in the editor. So you can also double click on one fun thing that you can do. We'll go into more detail on this, but you can double click on the title or composer fields to open up a score setup window. That will allow you to change those fields. So I can change this to, let's see, I'll change it to Pro Tools Authority. And it just automatically populates it right there. And you can change a bunch of other variables here. But we'll go into the score setup later because it's a little more advanced. I want to get you guys into the more of the recording and mixing stuff quickly. So those are the main windows we're going to touch upon today. Now that you're familiar with those, I would just make sure to check out those arrange functions in the window menu at the top of your session so you can stay organized and know those options are out there. So I mentioned that earlier. I'm going to close out this window. But you have some arrange options. And so tiling them, it'll make it so you can see both the mix and the edit window equally. And so tile horizontal and vertical, it just puts the split between them horizontally or vertically, right? And then cascade, it's kind of cool. It makes it so that they're almost full screen, but you can see both of them. So I'll just show you that. So see how this is a little bit smaller, and so you can see the mix window behind it and easily click on it. Although I never use that because I just do Command equals. So yeah, it's just good to stay organized and know those options are out there. Okay, so let's return to the edit window and the different edit tools. So if you remember, these tools are in the top section of the edit window, which is also known as the toolbar, right? So we mentioned the main tools earlier. I'm just going to kind of show you with my mouse where these tools are, just in case. So it's right around here. These are the tools. But here's a more complete list of the tools, right? So there's the zoomer tool, the trim tool, the selector tool. There's the grabber tool. There's the scrubber tool. There's the pencil tool. And then finally, there's the smart tool, which I have highlighted in blue, right? Okay, so let's start with the zoomer tool. So the zoomer tool is for zooming in and out on an area. It's pretty obvious, right? So here's the zoomer tool. I'm going to select it. It's as easy as clicking on it. You can zoom in on a clip, including the waveform, right? And you can zoom both horizontally and vertically. So if you look, you'll notice that there's a small arrow at the bottom of the zoom tool. So this little arrow right here. And this is because there are two types of zoom tool. And if you click and hold on the zoom tool, you'll see the options. So I'm going to click and hold and see I have normal zoom and I have single zoom. So with normal zoom mode, you will still be using the zoomer tool after a single zooming. And in single zoom mode, it's the one with the little arrow above it. So if we were to switch it and you weren't sure which one you're in, it's the one with the little arrow above the zoom icon, right? So in single zoom mode, you return to having your last used tool enabled instead of the zoom tool after a single zoom. So if you just want to zoom once, you use that, obviously, right? So you can select your zoom and you can click on an area on a track where you want to zoom to use the tool. So I'm just going to select normal zoom so I don't have to keep going back to it. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So I'm just going to click right here on this section and see how it's zooming in and it centers me. So your edit window will become centered around your zoom point, and the zoom point is where you clicked, and each click brings you one zoom level in. So another way to zoom with the zoom tool is to click and drag to zoom into a very specific area of your tracks. So I'm gonna just zoom into this section because it's very identifiable, right? And see how there's a little rectangle that opens up? That's denoting where you're gonna zoom into. So there I am, and here's the waveform. So that's good to know about, right? So to do both horizontal and vertical zoom, which is something that Avid calls marquee zooming, you can hold Command and drag on an area, or Control and drag if you're on a Windows machine, I believe. So let me just kind of show you that. So I'm going to hold Command and see how now, instead of being the entire height of the track, it's just whatever height I want. And see how it brings up the waveform as well as zooming in on the waveform. So it's both horizontally and vertically. And then holding Option while using the zoom tool will zoom you out. Okay, so I'll just show you that really quick. So I'm holding Option and see how my little cursor here, it goes from being a plus sign to a minus sign. So that'll tell you that you're doing it right? And then I click and it zooms out. So this is actually a really good one to know because a lot of functions in Pro Tools are reversed if you hold the Option key, or I believe it's the Alt key on Windows. So keep Option, the key, in mind as an important modifier key because it's going to come back a lot. So you can also double click on the Zoomer tool button to make the session zoom in or out. So that the tracks display area of the edit window, if you remember from earlier, that's this section right here with all the tracks, right, that we're working in. So it'll make it zoom out so that that area is zoomed perfectly to see the entire length of the longest track. So I'll just show you that really quick. So here's the end of my longest track, right? So I'm going to double click and it brings you right in there, perfectly zoomed to see the whole thing. And it'll work if you're zoomed in too far too. And you just want to quickly see everything. Another good way to zoom is to hold Command and hit the bracket keys to zoom in and out. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to hold Command, and these are the bracket keys. If you see in the bottom left of my screen, that's what I mean by bracket. It's that right icon, right? So it'll zoom you in and out. That's a pretty good one. You can also use the R and the T keys in the same exact way to zoom if you have keyboard commands focus active. So we haven't touched upon this yet, so I'm going to kind of explain to you what those are. So the keyboard commands focus, what it does is it turns a lot of the keys on your keyboard into shortcuts. So you don't need to hold down a modifier key like Command to perform an action. So with the zoom one we just looked at, right, it's Command and then bracket, but to make it even faster, I can just hit R or T and it'll zoom. So it's like fewer keys, right? So the way to turn that on and off is this little A to Z icon. So right now it's yellow, right? So my R and T are going to work because it's active. It's in that keyboard commands focus mode. So I'm using R and T right now to zoom, right? So if I unclick that, R and T aren't going to work. So you see how I'm hitting R and T and it's not zooming? So then I have to do this command brackets. So a lot of people will use that. And then some people don't like using that because then a lot of your keys are tied up. If you want to use them, they're going to do something else type of thing. So yeah, it's just useful for if you don't want to have to hold down the modifier key. But when it's active, R and T is for zooming. So it's a good one to learn. And it's the same as hitting that command and then hitting the brackets key. So, okay, so that's about all that we have time for today. But I hope you guys were able to learn something new about the different windows and the layouts of the Pro Tools software. In episode 3, we will definitely continue along these lines and we'll cover detail on the other tools besides the zoom tool, including the trim tool, the selector tool, the grabber tool, the scrubber tool, the pencil tool, and the smart tool. So we'll also get into some great detail on what each of the edit modes on the top left-hand side of your toolbar in the edit window will do. which again is right here with the shuffle, slip, spot, and grid. And we'll make sure that you have a thorough understanding of that, because that's really important if you're going to start editing right away. We'll also go into more detail on some of the other subjects we touched upon today, like some details of the timeline display and other toolbar items. Then we'll go into a more hands-on, friendly topic of creating and starting to work with tracks and possibly a lot more. So thanks for watching Pro Tools Authority, and I hope to see you guys next time.